I never imagined that buying a backup generator would turn me into the most hated man in Pinecrest Meadows. But here we are, watching my neighbors shiver through the worst winter Montana had seen in 30 years while I sat warm and cozy with my heat running full blast. My name is Derek Ingram, and I moved to this subdivision outside of Billings about 5 years ago. The house was perfect, a nice 3-bedroom ranch with a garage, decent yard, and what I thought was a reasonable HOA, keyword being thought. For the first few years, things were fine. Sure, they complained when my grass was half an inch too long once, and they sent me a nastily worded letter about leaving my trash cans visible from the street on a non-collection day, but nothing too insane. That all changed when Patricia Hendricks became HOA president. Patricia was the textbook definition of a middle-aged Karen. Blonde highlights that were just a touch too brassy, the kind of sunglasses that cost more than my monthly grocery bill, and a permanent expression that suggested she had just smelled something unpleasant. She drove a white BMW SUV with a custom license plate that read HOA Queen, which should have been my first warning sign. But I figured, how bad could it be? The trouble started in early October when I decided to install a backup generator. Montana winters are no joke, and after spending 3 days without power the previous February, huddled under every blanket I owned and eating cold canned soup, I swore I would never go through that again. I did my research, got all the proper permits from the county, hired a licensed electrician, and had a beautiful natural gas generator installed on a concrete pad behind my house. It was barely visible from the street, met all noise ordinances, and was completely legal. 2 days after installation, I found a letter taped to my front door. Not in my mailbox, mind you, which would be a federal offense, but taped right there where anyone walking by could see it. The letter was printed on fancy HOA letterhead with Patricia's name prominently displayed at the bottom. "Dear Mr. Ingram," it began, "it has come to our attention that you have installed an unauthorized structure on your property without seeking HOA approval. Please be advised that any exterior modifications must be submitted to the Architectural Review Committee for approval before installation. You are hereby required to attend the next HOA meeting on October 15th to address this violation. Failure to comply may result in fines and legal action." I read the letter 3 times, feeling my blood pressure rise with each pass. I had checked the HOA covenants before installing the generator. Generators were allowed as long as they met local noise ordinances and were not visible from the front of the property. Mine checked both boxes, but I figured I would show up to the meeting, explain the situation, and that would be the end of it. The October 15th meeting was held in the community clubhouse, a building that desperately needed updating, but somehow never made it onto Patricia's priority list. I arrived at 7 p.m. sharp, carrying a folder with copies of my permits, the HOA covenants with the relevant sections highlighted, and photos showing that my generator was barely visible from any angle. The room was set up like a courtroom, which should have been my second warning sign. Patricia sat at a table at the front, flanked by 2 other board members. Gary Morrison, a retired accountant who seemed to live in fear of Patricia, and Susan Chen, who owned the yoga studio downtown and always looked like she would rather be anywhere else. About 20 other homeowners were scattered throughout the folding chairs, most of them looking bored. I recognized a few neighbors but did not really know anyone well. That was about to change. "Meeting will come to order," Patricia announced, banging a gavel that seemed excessive for a HOA meeting. "First order of business, the generator violation at 1847 Meadowbrook Lane, property of Derek Ingram." I stood up. "Hi, I am Derek." I received the letter about my generator, but I believe there has been a misunderstanding. According to the HOA covenants, specifically Section 12, subsection 4, generators are allowed as long as they meet noise ordinances and are not visible from the front of the property. I walked up and handed Patricia my folder. She did not even open it. Mr. Ingram, while the covenants may technically allow generators, they must still go through the approval process. You failed to submit an application to the Architectural Review Committee. The covenants do not require approval for generators, I said, keeping my voice calm. It is not listed as a structure requiring pre-approval. I have the section right here if you want to review it. Patricia's expression soured. The board has determined that all exterior additions require approval, regardless of what the covenants specifically state. The covenants are a living document, subject to interpretation. That is not how contracts work, I said, feeling my frustration building. The covenants are legally binding. You cannot just decide they mean something different on a whim. A murmur went through the small crowd. Gary shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Susan was studying her fingernails like they held the secrets of the universe. Mr. Ingram, I suggest you watch your tone, Patricia said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. The board is willing to grandfather in your generator under certain conditions. We propose that generator usage be restricted to daytime hours only, specifically between 8 a.m. and 8 p.m. Nighttime operation disturbs the peace and tranquility of our community. I stared at her, genuinely confused. My generator only runs during power outages. It is an automatic backup system. I cannot control when the power goes out. Then you will need to install a manual override that allows you to shut it down at 8 p.m., Patricia said, as if this was the most reasonable thing in the world. Or alternatively, you can remove the generator entirely. That defeats the entire purpose of having a backup generator, I said. Power outages happen in winter storms. You want me to freeze in the dark because it might be after 8 p.m.? We all make sacrifices for the good of the community, Patricia replied. She actually had the audacity to smile at me. Now, unless you want to argue further, I suggest you comply with the board's reasonable request. I looked around the room. Most people were avoiding eye contact. A few looked sympathetic but said nothing. This was clearly Patricia's show, and no one wanted to be in the spotlight. I need time to consider this, I said finally. This was not what I expected when I came here tonight. You have until November 1st to submit your plan for compliance, Patricia said, making a note on her tablet. That is more than generous. Next order of business, we need to discuss the holiday decoration guidelines. I left the meeting furious. The more I thought about it, the more absurd the whole situation became. I had followed every rule, gotten every permit, and done everything legally. And now Patricia wanted me to essentially render my generator useless because of some arbitrary time restriction that appeared nowhere in the actual covenants. I spent the next few days researching. I called my real estate attorney, Mark Stevenson, who I had used when buying the house. Mark was a straight shooter in his late 50s who had been practicing in Montana for 30 years. Derek, buddy, HOA disputes are always messy, Mark said when I explained the situation. The good news is you are absolutely right. The covenants do not require approval for generators, and they cannot just invent new rules without going through the proper amendment process, which requires a vote of all homeowners. So what do? I asked. Ignore them, Mark said simply. Keep the generator. If they fine you, do not pay. If they put a lien on your property, we will challenge it in court and win. But honestly, they are probably bluffing. Most HOA boards back down when someone actually stands up to them. And if they do not back down, Then we take them to court, and you will probably win attorney fees too, Mark said. These kinds of cases are pretty straightforward. They cannot enforce rules that do not exist in the governing documents. Feeling more confident, I drafted a formal response to the HOA. I cited the specific covenant sections, included copies of my permits, and made it clear that I would not be complying with their arbitrary restrictions. I sent it certified mail so there would be a record. Patricia's response came faster than I expected. On November 3rd, I received another letter informing me that I was being fined $500 for failure to comply with the board's directive. The letter also stated that the fine would increase by $100 per week until I complied. I did not pay it. Instead, I sent a letter from Mark's office, politely but firmly stating that the fines were not enforceable and that any attempt to place a lien on my property would result in immediate legal action. Then the weather turned. November in Montana is unpredictable. Some years it is mild until Thanksgiving. Other years, winter hits early and hard. This was shaping up to be one of the hard years. By mid-November, we had already had 2 significant snowfalls, and the temperatures were dropping into the teens at night. The first real power outage came on November 22nd, 3 days before Thanksgiving. A storm rolled through around 6 p.m., bringing heavy snow and high winds. By 7 p.m., the power was out across most of the subdivision. By 7:15, my generator kicked on automatically, and my lights flickered back to life. I was cooking dinner when I heard the pounding on my front door. I opened it to find Patricia standing there, wrapped in a puffy North Face jacket, her face red from cold and anger. "Turn it off," she demanded. "Turn what off?" I asked, genuinely confused for a moment. "The generator. It is after 8 p.m. You are in violation of the noise ordinance." "I am not in violation of anything," I said calmly. "My generator meets all county noise requirements. And the HOA restriction you are trying to enforce does not actually exist in the covenants." "The board voted on it," Patricia snapped. "The board does not have the authority to create new restrictions without a vote of all homeowners," I replied. "And even if you did, you cannot enforce retroactive rules on equipment that was already legally installed." "We will see about that," Patricia said. She actually shook her finger at me like I was a child. "You are going to regret this, Mr. Ingram." She stormed off, nearly slipping on my front steps in her hurry. I closed the door and went back to my dinner, but I had a sinking feeling this was far from over. The power came back on around midnight. I went to bed warm and comfortable, not thinking much more about it. But the next morning, I woke up to find a county code enforcement officer at my door. "Mr. Ingram, I am Officer James Paulson with Code Enforcement. We received a noise complaint about a generator at this address." I invited him in and explained the whole situation. Officer Paulson listened patiently, then asked to see my permits and inspect the generator. We walked around back, and he took some measurements and noise readings. "Everything looks good to me," he said, making notes on his tablet. "Generator is properly installed, permitted, and well within noise limits. The complaint is unfounded. You are all set." "What about HOA restrictions?" I asked. Officer Paulson shrugged. "That is between you and your HOA. As far as county code goes, you are completely compliant." Have a good Thanksgiving. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. Over the next few weeks, code enforcement showed up 3 more times, each time in response to complaints from Patricia. Each time they found nothing wrong. Officer Paulson started to seem annoyed on the 3rd visit. "Look, Mr. Ingram, I am going to file a report recommending we flag this address for harassment complaints," he said. "It is clear someone is abusing the complaint system. I will have to respond if more complaints come in, but I will be noting the pattern. December brought more snow and colder temperatures. The power grid in our area was old and struggled with the increased demand. Outages became more frequent, sometimes lasting hours. Each time, my generator kicked on faithfully, keeping my house warm and lit. And each time, I could feel the resentment from my neighbors growing. It came to a head at the December HOA meeting. I did not plan to attend, but I received multiple calls and texts from people in the neighborhood urging me to show up. Something was happening, and apparently I was at the center of it. The meeting room was packed, easily 50 people crammed into a space meant for 30. The energy was tense. Patricia looked triumphant as she called the meeting to order. "Thank you all for coming on this cold evening," she began. "I know many of you are here because of the ongoing generator issue. The board has been working diligently to resolve this situation, but Mr. Ingram has been uncooperative." I felt everyone's eyes turn toward me. I stayed seated, keeping my expression neutral. "Therefore," Patricia continued, "the board is proposing an amendment to the covenants. Effective immediately, all generators must be turned off between the hours of 8 p.m. and 8 a.m., 7 days a week. This will ensure the peace and quiet of our community while still allowing generators for emergency use during reasonable hours." "That is insane," someone called out. I turned to see it was Tom Richardson, who lived 2 streets over. "Most power outages happen during storms, which do not care what time it is." "I understand your concern," Patricia said, her tone suggesting she did not understand at all. "But we must balance individual needs against community standards. Now, according to our bylaws, covenant amendments require a 2/3 vote of all homeowners. We will conduct that vote tonight." "You cannot conduct a proper vote when you only gave us notice yesterday," Tom argued. "Half the neighborhood is not even here." "All homeowners were notified via email and the community portal," Patricia said smoothly. "Those who chose not to attend have forfeited their vote. Now, all in favor of the amendment." I watched in disbelief as about 30 hands went up. Some people looked uncertain, others enthusiastic. Patricia counted carefully, her smile growing. "All opposed." About 15 hands went up, including mine and Tom's. Several people did not vote at all, looking uncomfortable with the whole situation. "The amendment passes," Patricia announced. "Effective immediately, all generators must comply with the 8 p.m. to 8 a.m. quiet hours." "That is not a valid vote," I said, standing up. "You cannot just count the people in this room. The bylaws specifically state 2/3 of all homeowners, not 2/3 of those present. There are 147 homes in this subdivision. You needed 98 votes. You got 30. Patricia's smile faltered. "The amendment is valid. Those who did not attend waived their right to vote." "That is not how it works," I said. I pulled out my phone and showed her the bylaws. "Right here, Section 8. 2/3 of all homeowners must vote in favor, not 2/3 of those present. All homeowners." Gary leaned over and whispered something to Patricia. Her expression shifted from triumphant to furious in about 2 seconds. "Fine," she said tightly. "We will conduct a proper vote by mail. In the meantime, we expect voluntary compliance with the proposed restrictions." "You will not get voluntary compliance from me," I said clearly. "My generator stays on when the power goes out, regardless of the time. It is legal, it is permitted, and it is not in violation of any enforceable HOA rule." The room erupted in arguments. Some people agreed with me, others sided with Patricia. It was chaos. The meeting fell apart shortly after that, with nothing else getting accomplished. As I was leaving, Tom caught up with me in the parking lot. "Hey man, I just want you to know I think you are completely right. This whole thing is ridiculous." "Thanks," I said. I appreciate that. Most people agree with you, actually, Tom said, but they are scared of Patricia. She has a way of making life hell for people who cross her. My wife and I got fined $2,000 last year because our fence was the wrong shade of white. The wrong shade. We had to repaint the entire thing. That is insane, I said. That is Patricia, Tom replied with a shrug. Anyway, good luck. I hope your generator keeps running all winter. The holidays were tense. Christmas week brought the worst storm of the season so far. 3 feet of snow fell over 2 days, and temperatures dropped below zero. The power went out on Christmas Eve and stayed out for nearly 24 hours. My generator ran the entire time. My house was warm, my fridge stayed cold, and I even cooked a full Christmas dinner for myself. I felt a little guilty eating my roasted chicken and mashed potatoes, while I knew my neighbors were probably eating sandwiches by candlelight, but not guilty enough to turn off my heat. Patricia called the police on me twice during those 24 hours, claiming noise violations. The officers who responded were polite, but clearly annoyed at being pulled away from other emergencies to deal with HOA drama. Both times they verified that my generator was within legal noise limits and left. The second officer, a young woman named Officer Martinez, actually apologized to me. I am sorry you are dealing with this, sir. We have got real emergencies to handle with this storm. People are stuck on highways, pipes are freezing, and we keep getting called out here for a generator that is not even loud. I appreciate you coming out anyway, I said. I know it is not your fault. After Christmas, Patricia apparently decided to escalate. I received a certified letter dated December 28th informing me that the HOA was placing a lien on my property for unpaid fines totaling $3,700. The letter detailed weekly fines dating back to November, plus late fees and administrative costs. I immediately forwarded everything to Mark, who filed a motion in district court to invalidate the lien. The hearing was scheduled for late January, which meant the lien would sit on my property record for at least a month. It was frustrating, but Mark assured me we would win. These cases are actually pretty straightforward, Mark explained over the phone. They cannot fine you for violating rules that do not exist. The judge will invalidate the lien and probably award you attorney fees. The question is whether you want to go further and sue for harassment. Let me get through this first, I said. Then we will see. January was brutal. Montana winters are always cold, but this one was record-breaking. We had multiple days where the temperature never got above zero, and nights regularly dropped to 20 below or worse. The power grid was failing constantly, sometimes multiple times per week. Each time the power went out, my generator kicked on, and each time I could feel the hostility from my neighbors intensifying. Some of it was directed at me, angry glares when I checked my mail or cleared my driveway. But increasingly, I noticed it was being directed at Patricia too. People were getting tired of freezing in the dark while I stayed comfortable, and they were starting to question why the HOA was wasting time and resources fighting over a generator instead of focusing on actual problems. The breaking point came during the 3rd week of January. A massive storm system moved in on January 19th, bringing the worst conditions of the winter. The power went out around 2 p.m. on a Sunday and did not come back. Hours turned into a day, then 2 days, then 3. The utility company was overwhelmed, dealing with downed lines and equipment failures across the region. My generator ran continuously. I kept my house at a comfortable 68 degrees, watched television, cooked hot meals, and generally lived normally. Meanwhile, the rest of the subdivision was slowly freezing. On the 2nd day, there was another emergency HOA meeting. I did not attend, but Tom called me afterward to fill me in. It was insane, Tom said. People were furious. Patricia tried to make the whole meeting about you and your generator, but everyone kept asking why the HOA has not done anything to help people without power. Families with kids are staying in hotels because their houses are getting down to 30 degrees inside. Pipes are freezing and bursting. And Patricia just kept ranting about noise ordinances and community standards. What happened? I asked. Susan Chen finally lost it, Tom said with something like admiration in his voice. She stood up and said that fighting over a generator during the worst winter in 30 years was the stupidest thing she had ever been part of. Then she resigned from the board effective immediately, just walked out. It was amazing. Good for her, I said. Yeah, but it gets better, Tom continued. After Susan left, Gary Morrison grew a spine for the first time in his life. He said he had reviewed the covenants and you were right. The generator restrictions were not enforceable. He moved to dismiss all fines against you. Patricia tried to vote it down, but Gary pointed out that with Susan gone, they did not have a quorum for board decisions. The meeting fell apart after that. Wow, I said. That is something. People are starting to realize Patricia has been lying to them, Tom said. She has been telling everyone that you were breaking the law and violating county codes. But Officer Paulson was at the meeting and he confirmed that your generator is completely legal and properly permitted. Patricia looked like she wanted to melt into the floor. The power came back on the afternoon of the third day. I was relieved, not because I needed it, but because I was genuinely worried about some of my neighbors. Freezing to death in your home is not how anyone should go, but the damage was done. The subdivision had spent 3 days in brutal cold, dealing with frozen pipes, spoiled food, and frightened children, all while watching my house stay lit and warm. The resentment was palpable, but it was increasingly directed at the HOA rather than at me. On January 24th, Tom, along with about 30 other homeowners, filed a petition to recall Patricia from the HOA board. According to the bylaws, a recall required signatures from 25% of homeowners and then a vote. They had the signatures within 2 days. Patricia fought it, of course. She sent out a long, rambling email to the entire subdivision claiming that the recall was orchestrated by me as retaliation, that she was just trying to maintain community standards, and that allowing generators to run all night would destroy property values. It was unhinged and desperate. The recall vote was held on February 2nd. It was not even close. Patricia was removed by a vote of 87 to 23, with the rest abstaining. Gary was elected as the new president, with Tom as vice president. One of their first acts was to officially withdraw all fines against me and issue a formal apology. We recognize that Mr. Ingram has been treated unfairly by the previous board. Gary read from a prepared statement at the meeting. His generator installation was legal, properly permitted, and in full compliance with both county codes and HOA covenants. All fines have been withdrawn, and we are working with the HOA attorney to remove the invalid lien from his property. I did not attend that meeting either, but Tom sent me the recording. It felt good to be vindicated, but I also felt exhausted. The whole ordeal had been draining. The court hearing to remove the lien was on January 27th, right in the middle of all the HOA drama. Mark and I showed up prepared with copies of the covenants, my permits, and a detailed timeline of events. The HOA's attorney, a bored-looking guy named Philip Marsh, barely put up a fight. Your Honor, the HOA board has decided to withdraw the lien, Philip said, sounding like he wanted to be anywhere else. This was filed under the previous board leadership, and the current board has determined the fines were issued in error. The judge, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s named Judge Sandra Walsh, looked less than impressed. "Counselor, this lien should never have been filed in the first place," Judge Walsh said. "I have reviewed the covenants and there is no basis for any of these fines. Your client has wasted this court's time and Mr. Ingram's time and money defending against a completely frivolous action." She ruled not only to remove the lien but also awarded me attorney fees totaling $6,300, plus court costs. It was a complete victory. But I was not done yet. The more I thought about what Patricia had put me through, the angrier I got. She had harassed me for months, filed false complaints with code enforcement and the police, placed an invalid lien on my property, and generally made my life miserable because I had the audacity to follow the rules and stand up for myself. After discussing it with Mark, I decided to file a lawsuit against Patricia personally for harassment, defamation, and abuse of process. The HOA itself was protected by various insurance policies and legal shields, but Patricia had gone far beyond her authority as board president. She had filed false police reports, made defamatory statements about me to neighbors and on the community forum, and had used her position to pursue a personal vendetta. The lawsuit was filed on February 10th. Patricia's reaction was predictable. She hired an attorney and vowed to fight. She sent another community-wide email claiming I was trying to destroy her financially, and that she had only been trying to protect the community. Most people ignored it. Discovery was revealing. Through the lawsuit, we obtained copies of all HOA emails and communications related to my generator. It turned out Patricia had been even worse than I realized. She had coordinated with several neighbors to file false noise complaints. She had lied to the code enforcement officer, claiming my generator was running constantly rather than just during outages. She had made posts on neighborhood social media groups claiming my generator was lowering property values, despite having zero evidence. Most damning, we found an email from Patricia to another board member from early December that read, "We need to make an example of Ingram. If we let him get away with ignoring the board, others will follow. I do not care if the generator is technically legal. We cannot let him win." It was a smoking gun that proved Patricia knew all along that my generator was legal, and that she was pursuing the complaints and fines anyway out of spite. The case never made it to trial. In late March, Patricia's attorney reached out to Mark about settling. Patricia was facing not only my lawsuit, but also potential criminal charges for filing false police reports. The county attorney's office had opened an investigation after Officer Martinez filed a formal complaint about the repeated false noise violation reports. We settled for $45,000, which Patricia's homeowner's insurance ended up covering most of. As part of the settlement, Patricia was required to send a written apology to me and post a public apology on the community forum acknowledging that my generator was always legal and that she had pursued unfounded complaints against me. The apology was terse and clearly written by her attorney, but it was public and permanent. More satisfying was the fact that Patricia and her husband quietly listed their house for sale in early April and moved out in May. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that they relocated to somewhere in Idaho. I did not bother to find out where. I was just glad she was gone. The criminal investigation went nowhere, unfortunately. The county attorney decided that, while Patricia had definitely filed misleading complaints, they did not rise to the level of criminal false reporting. It was disappointing but not surprising. The civil victory was enough for me. Spring came late that year, but when it finally arrived, it was glorious. The snow melted, revealing grass that was somehow still green. My generator sat silent on its concrete pad behind my house, no longer needed now that the power grid was stable again. The new HOA board, led by Gary and Tom, turned out to be reasonable and competent. They focused on actual community issues like road maintenance and snow removal rather than petty enforcement of arbitrary rules. The neighborhood felt calmer, more friendly. People actually waved when I walked my dog now instead of glaring. In June, the HOA held a community barbecue, the first one in years. I almost did not go, still feeling burned out from the months of drama. But Tom convinced me to show up. "Come on, man," Tom said. "You are a neighborhood hero. People respect what you did, standing up to Patricia. You should be there." I went, mostly because Tom promised there would be good beer. It turned out to be a nice afternoon. The weather was perfect, warm but not hot. Kids ran around playing while adults stood in clusters talking and laughing. The tension that had hung over the subdivision all winter was gone. Several people approached me to thank me for standing up to Patricia. Some apologized for not speaking up sooner. An older couple, the Petersons, told me that Patricia had been terrorizing them for years over minor violations, and my lawsuit had inspired them to finally fight back on some old fines they had been unfairly charged. They won their case too. "You started something, Mrs. Peterson said, patting my arm. "People are not scared anymore." Gary pulled me aside at one point. "I owe you an apology," he said. "I should have stood up to Patricia from the beginning. I knew she was wrong, but I was a coward. You did what I should have done months ago." "It worked out," I said. "Better late than never." "We are actually looking at revising the entire covenant structure," Gary continued. "There is a lot of outdated stuff in there, and some sections are contradictory. We are going to propose a comprehensive update this fall, with input from all the homeowners. Make it clearer and fairer." "That sounds like a good idea," I said. "I was hoping you would consider joining the board," Gary said. "We could use someone who actually understands the rules and is not afraid to stand up for what is right." I thought about it. The idea of voluntarily getting more involved in HOA politics was not appealing. On the other hand, I had fought hard to make things better. It seemed like a waste to walk away now. "Let me think about it," I said. Summer rolled on, hot and dry like Montana summers are. My life returned to something approaching normal. The generator sat unused, a silent guardian against future winter storms. I did join the HOA board eventually, taking over Susan Chen's old seat. It turned out to be less terrible than I expected. Gary and Tom were good to work with, and we actually accomplished useful things like upgrading the playground equipment and improving drainage in the low-lying areas of the subdivision. The covenant revisions took months to finalize. We held community meetings, solicited feedback, and worked with a real estate attorney to draft updates that were fair and legally sound. One of the key changes was adding explicit protections for backup generators, clarifying that they were allowed without prior approval as long as they met county codes and were not visible from the front of the property. The updated covenants passed by an overwhelming majority in November. When winter came again, it was milder than the previous year. We still had cold snaps and snow, but nothing like the brutal cold of the year before. The power only went out twice, both brief outages that lasted less than 4 hours. My generator kicked on both times, humming quietly in the background, and not a single person complained. I ran into Officer Paulson one day at the grocery store. He recognized me and came over. "Hey, you are the generator guy, right?" he said with a smile. "I heard you sued that HOA lady and won." "Good for you." "Thanks," I said. Sorry you kept getting called out for those bogus complaints. Part of the job, he said with a shrug, but I will admit it was satisfying when she finally got some consequences. We see a lot of HOA abuse in this job. Most people just give up and comply because fighting is too expensive and exhausting. Good on you for sticking it out. That conversation stuck with me. Patricia had counted on me backing down because most people do. Fighting an HOA is expensive, stressful, and time-consuming. Even when you are completely in the right, it is easier to just comply and move on with your life. Patricia had used that dynamic to bully people for years. But I had the resources to fight, and more importantly, I had been angry enough and stubborn enough to see it through. If I had not fought, Patricia would still be running the HOA, filing frivolous complaints and fining people for arbitrary violations. The neighborhood would still be living under her petty tyranny. In a weird way, the whole experience made me appreciate the community more. Before the generator saga, I had been pretty disconnected from my neighbors. I waved politely, mowed my lawn, paid my HOA fees, and generally kept to myself. The conflict forced me to engage with the community, and once Patricia was gone, I discovered there were actually a lot of good people living here. Tom and I became genuinely friends. We started meeting up to watch football games and grab beers occasionally. The Petersons invited me over for dinner a few times. I even dated a woman named Lisa who lived 3 streets over for a few months, though that fizzled out amicably when we realized we did not have much in common beyond geographic proximity. The second winter post-generator was even milder. The power stayed on all season. My generator never kicked on once. Part of me was disappointed, weirdly. That machine had become a symbol of my stubborn refusal to be bullied. It sat there on its concrete pad, a monument to the principle that sometimes you have to stand your ground even when it would be easier to back down. In March, I got an unexpected letter from Susan Chen, the former board member who had resigned during the emergency meeting. She had moved out of the subdivision shortly after resigning, relocating to Bozeman for a new job opportunity. Her letter was friendly and reflective. "I wanted to thank you for what you did," she wrote. "I was on that board for 3 years, and I watched Patricia become more controlling and unreasonable as time went on. I told myself I was being a moderating influence, that I needed to stay on the board to prevent her worst impulses. But really, I was just enabling her behavior by going along with it. Your situation was the final straw. When she was so determined to fine and harass you despite knowing she was wrong, I realized I could not be part of it anymore." Walking out of that meeting was one of the most freeing moments of my life. I should have done it years earlier. I hope you are well, and I hope the neighborhood has improved since Patricia left. I wrote back, thanking her for reaching out and letting her know that yes, things had definitely improved. It felt good to close that loop. By the time the 3rd spring arrived, the generator drama felt like ancient history. New people moved into Patricia's old house, a young couple with a baby who seemed nice enough. They had no idea about the history of the neighborhood conflicts. To them, it was just a pleasant subdivision with reasonable HOA fees and a friendly community, which I suppose it had become. The generator still sits on its pad behind my house. It runs a test cycle for 15 minutes every week, making sure it is ready if needed. I hear it hum to life each Wednesday afternoon, a reliable presence. I keep it maintained, changing the oil and filters according to the manufacturer's schedule. It has become part of my routine, part of my home. Sometimes I think about that first winter, about sitting warm and comfortable while my neighbors froze, and I wonder if I was selfish. Should I have compromised? Should I have voluntarily shut down the generator at 8 p.m. to keep the peace? But then I remember Patricia's email. I do not care if the generator is technically legal. We cannot let him win. It was never about the generator itself, or about noise or community standards. It was about power and control. Patricia could not stand the fact that I had done something without her permission, even though I did not need her permission. She wanted me to submit, to acknowledge her authority over me. If I had backed down, she would have won. Not just against me, but against everyone in the neighborhood who might have considered standing up to her in the future. Every unfair fine, every arbitrary rule, every petty complaint would have continued unchallenged because people would have seen that even someone who followed all the rules and fought back still eventually gave in. So no, I do not regret it. I stayed warm all winter while they froze, and I would do it again. Not because I enjoyed their discomfort, but because sometimes the only way to stop a bully is to refuse to be bullied. The generator sits ready, waiting for the next power outage, the next storm, the next crisis. And when that crisis comes, it will kick on automatically, keeping my house warm and lit, just like it is supposed to. Because I followed the rules, I got the proper permits, and I installed it legally. And no HOA board president, no matter how determined or vindictive, can take that away from me. That is the lesson I learned from the great generator war of Pinecrest Meadows. Know your rights, stand your ground, and never let someone else's need for control dictate your choices, especially when you are in the right. It might be cold, it might be expensive, and it might be exhausting, but in the end, it is worth it. The subdivision is quieter now, in a good way. The new covenants are clearer and fairer. The board focuses on maintenance and community building rather than enforcement and fines. People are friendlier, more willing to help each other out. Last winter, when the Johnsons' 3 houses down had their furnace die during a cold snap, 5 different neighbors offered to let them stay in spare bedrooms until it was fixed. That is what a community should be. And through it all, my generator stands ready. A symbol of preparedness, sure, but also a reminder that sometimes the right thing to do is the hard thing, and sometimes standing up for yourself means letting others face the consequences of their own choices. Patricia tried to force me to freeze along with everyone else, to make me share in collective misery rather than prepare and protect myself. I refused, and that refusal changed everything. I still live at 1847 Meadowbrook Lane in Pinecrest Meadows, just outside Billings, Montana. My grass is the right height, my trash cans are hidden on non-collection days, and my generator is properly permitted and maintained. I am in full compliance with every rule, regulation, and covenant that applies to my property. And if the power goes out tonight, tomorrow, or 10 years from now, my generator will kick on automatically, regardless of what time it is, because that is what it is designed to do. And unlike HOA presidents, generators do not care about arbitrary rules or petty power games. They just work. And sometimes, that is exactly what you need.